Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into today's most interesting articles, pulling out the key insights for you. Our aim is simple: give you a clear understanding of complex topics drawn from different newspaper sections. Today we're covering everything from pensions to nuclear strategy and even some surprising science. Okay, first up, the editorial section, and it tackles a really big one: India's pension system. The numbers are pretty stark. Our sources say only about 12% of India's workforce has formal pension coverage.
12%, yeah, that's incredibly low.
Right, and pension assets, just 17% of GDP. Compare that to advanced economies where it's, what, up to 80% sometimes?
Exactly. It's a massive difference.
And the kicker is 85% of the informal labor force, the ones generating over half the GDP, they're mostly left out. It feels like, well, a ticking clock. How serious is this problem?
Oh, it's incredibly serious. Think about the demographics. India's old age dependency ratio, it's projected to hit 30% by 2050.
30%? Wow.
Yeah. And if India wants to reach developed economy status by 2047, tackling potential old age poverty is, well, fundamental. Expanding pension coverage is crucial. But our sources point to three main roadblocks: scalability, sensitization, and sustainability.
Okay, let's break those down. Scalability first.
Right. The big issue here is fragmentation. You have all these different schemes running in parallel. Even recent efforts like Social Security for gig workers, while maybe well-intentioned, tend to just add another layer rather than integrating things.
So more complexity, not less.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with, say, Japan. They have a mandatory flat rate contribution for basically everyone aged 2059. Self-employed, private sector, public sector, all in.
Okay.
Or New Zealand with a universal public pension for everyone over 65. These are broad, structured systems.
Makes sense. And the second hurdle, sensitization.
Yeah, which basically means a lack of awareness. Financial literacy is generally low, so people might not understand pensions or plan adequately.
So what's the fix there?
Yeah.
Education.
That's a big part of it. Look at Australia. They actually build superannuation planning into the school curriculum.
Interesting. Start early.
Exactly. The Netherlands requires pension funds to send out annual statements so people know exactly what they've accrued. And the UK's opt-out system, that's been huge for participation. Default enrollment makes a massive difference. Nigeria is also doing interesting things with digital infrastructure to boost reach.
Okay, so scalability, sensitization. What about sustainability?
Well, the Mercer CFA Institute Global Pension Index for 2024 gave India a score of just 44%. And it specifically noted a sharp decline in the adequacy ratio.
Ouch. That doesn't sound good.
No. And it highlights the need for private fund support. You know, China's actually facing challenges with its public pension system, partly because it lacks strong private fund involvement.
I see.
Whereas countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, Australia, the US, they rely heavily on private funds to provide liquidity and generate reliable returns within their broader systems.
Okay, that really paints a picture of the challenges. So with all that in mind, what are the actual proposals for designing a better system for India's future? How do you fix this?
It really requires a more holistic approach. The sources suggest a three-tiered framework.
3 tiers.
Yeah. First, a mandatory basic pension guarantee. Think a flat-rate contributory system for everyone, regardless of whether they're formally employed or not. That creates a baseline safety net.
Okay, universal floor. Makes sense.
Right. Second tier, occupational pensions. These would be employer-based, maybe mandatory, or perhaps opt-out using auto-enrollment. That leverages the existing employer structures.
Right, build on what's there.
And the third tier is voluntary savings. Things like tax incentives, market-linked returns, flexible products to encourage people to save more on their own. The key innovation here is really bringing India's huge informal sector into a stable retirement system, which past efforts haven't managed well.
And beyond the structure.
Well, you definitely need targeted financial literacy campaigns, schools, colleges. User-friendly digital platforms for enrollment are crucial too. And clear, mandated annual disclosure so people understand their entitlements. Plus, of course, strong investment rules and oversight to keep the funds healthy and able to pay out long-term.
It sounds like a major undertaking.
It is, but given India's changing demographics, building an inclusive system is, well, incredibly urgent.
All right, let's shift gears. Next up, from the opinion section, a piece that starts with a pretty arresting claim. The world has entered a third nuclear age.
Yeah. That definitely grabs your attention.
It does. And the article uses the recent Israeli bombing of Iran as a prime example. It argues these actions really push international law to its limits, break diplomatic norms, yet don't face much criticism from major powers. It certainly makes you pause and think about, well, where things stand globally.
It absolutely does. And, to really get what this third nuclear age means, it helps to quickly look at the first two.
Okay, quick history lesson.
Right. The first nuclear age, that was the Cold War, U.S.-Soviet rivalry, huge arsenals peaking around 70,000 warheads combined, and that chilling concept of mutually assured destruction, man.
Right, deterrence through fear.
Exactly. We saw arms control treaties then, like New START, which limits deployed warheads. But that's set to expire in early 2026, and right now there's no successor treaty anywhere in sight.
That's concerning. And the second age.
That followed the Cold War. Initially, there was a lot of optimism, talk of global zero, eliminating nuclear weapons entirely.
Sounds nice. Didn't quite happen, though.
No. In hindsight, the article calls it an age of cynicism. While there were efforts like a test ban and talks on fissile materials, the main outcome was extending the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, indefinitely.
And that did what? Exactly.
It basically cemented the status of the 5 original nuclear weapons states. It kind of normalized their possession while making disarmament calls seem, well, a bit hollow. And it's worth remembering, the huge U.S. nuclear modernization plan costing $1.5 to $2 trillion actually started under Obama, and China's arsenal has been growing rapidly, now estimated at around 600 warheads.
Okay, so that sets the stage. This third age sounds, as the source says, Messier. What makes it so different, so unpredictable?
That's the key question. Nuclear weapons are back in the spotlight, definitely back in focus, but now it's happening while the whole global order is in flux.
How so?
Well, look at China. The article suggests their aggressive nuclear buildup is about creating a strategic counterbalance, actively trying to shape the global power balance.
Okay.
And then there's Russia's actions regarding Ukraine, the nuclear threats, Putin reportedly considering some kind of nuclear use back in 2022. That's a really significant shift.
How is it different from Cold War deterrence?
During the Cold War, MAD was ultimately about maintaining the status quo, preventing war between the superpowers. Now, the article argues nuclear weapons are being used or threatened explicitly to try and change the status quo. That's a fundamental difference.
Right. Using them offensively, almost.
Or at least leveraging the threat offensively. We're also seeing European allies rethinking deterrence because they feel U.S. support for NATO might be waning.
Like who?
Britain is apparently reconsidering an airborne nuclear deterrent, something they scrapped 25 years ago. France is modernizing bases, maybe even thinking about sharing nuclear assets with neighbors if asked.
So proliferation or redeployment?
It feels like weapons are moving out once again, as the source puts it. Remember Putin transferring tactical nukes to Belarus last year? After decades of consolidation, that's a reversal.
So what's the big takeaway warning here?
The source puts it starkly. If our thinking about deterrence is shifting now, during this period of global realignment and instability, we could be facing self-inflicted nuclear insecurity. It's a serious warning about where things might be headed.
Wow. Okay, from global insecurity to groundbreaking plant science. Let's move to the science section for something completely different, but just as fascinating. Imagine this. A plant learns to handle the cold, right? And then it passes that ability down to its kids and grandkids for generations without changing its DNA code.
It sounds almost Lamarckian, doesn't it?
Exactly. It directly brings up that old Lamarck versus Darwin debate. This new study on rice plants seems to challenge some really fundamental ideas about evolution and inheritance. How does this fit into the history of genetics?
Well, it really does revisit that core debate. You had Lamarck in the early 1800s with his theory of acquired characters, basically. Traits developed during life could be passed on.
Use it or lose it and pass it on.
Kind of, yeah. Then Darwin came along in 1859 with natural selection variations happen, beneficial ones stick around through inheritance. And Lamarck's ideas mostly fell out of favor, especially after experiments like Weismann cutting off mice tails for generations.
Right, the baby still had tails.
Exactly. And Mendel's work showed stable units of inheritance genes. Once DNA was identified, it seemed settled. Inheritance is about changes in the DNA sequence, mutations.
But then epigenetics came along.
But then epigenetics, yeah. It started with observations, like Royal Alexander Brink's work with maize back in the 50s. He saw plants with identical genes for kernel color, showing different pigmentation, and that trait was heritable.
So same genes, different outcome, passed down.
Right. It suggested something else was going on. We realized genes need to be expressed, turned on, or off. Epigenetics is the study of these mechanisms, often small chemical tags added to DNA that regulate gene activity without changing the sequence itself.
Like little sticky notes on the DNA saying, read this or ignore this.
That's a great analogy. And then in 1975, Arthur Riggs proposed these epigenetic marks, these sticky notes, could actually be inherited. That was the first real hint that maybe Lamarck wasn't entirely wrong, that environment could leave heritable marks.
Which leads us directly to this rice study. This sounds like the big proof.
It's certainly a landmark piece of evidence, published in Cell just recently, May 22nd. Researchers took rice plants, or Rhiza sativa, and exposed them to cold temperatures.
Okay.
The plants adapted, they gained cold tolerance, and they did it by changing epigenetic marks on a specific gene called ACT1.
ACT1, and the key finding.
The key is that this change, this acquired tolerance via epigenetic marks, was heritable. It passed down through 5 generations. The offspring were also better at handling cold.
Wow. And how did it work? What was the mechanism?
Well, ACT1 is usually active in rice, involved in growth.
Yeah.
In the cold, normally a chemical tag, a methyl group, gets added to the gene, switching it off. Without enough ACT1 protein, the plant struggles.
Right.
But these cold-adapted plants, they didn't add that off-switch methyl tag in the cold, so ACT1 stayed active, producing protein, helping the plant cope and survive. And crucially, this pattern of not adding the tag was passed down.
So the sticky note instruction was inherited.
Essentially, yes. The researchers looked for genetic differences too, but none they found could explain the improved cold tolerance. It was the epigenetic differences they found, over 12,380 of them, that correlated with the trait.
That's incredible.
It really is. The implication, as the source puts it, is quite profound. Inheritance, in some rare cases, is not determined by the code for life, but rather by what that life has endured. It opens up huge questions about adaptation, evolution, and maybe even applications in agriculture.
Mind-bending stuff.
Well.
Okay, from the microscopic world of genes, let's shift back to geopolitics. We're turning to the text section now, focusing on the air war between Israel and Iran, and specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu's Endgame. Now, this is obviously a very complex and sensitive situation. Just a reminder, our goal here is simply to relay the information and analysis presented in our sources impartially.
Absolutely. And the sources paint a stark picture. They detail Israel launching what's called an all-out air war on June 13th, with the stated aim of destroying Iran's nuclear program.
So, strikes on nuclear sites.
Yes, reports mention strikes on facilities like Natanz and Isfahan, hitting ballistic missile sites, and even targeted assassinations of Iranian generals. Iran, in turn, retaliated, launching apparently close to 400 missiles at Israel, causing casualties.
And what's the status of Iran's nuclear facilities after the initial strikes?
According to the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, reporting around June 16th, the attacks severely damaged, if not entirely destroyed, centrifuges at Natanz. 4 buildings were also destroyed at Isfahan's Nuclear Technology Center. But, and this is crucial, Fordo, which is Iran's most heavily fortified site, deep underground, was reported as largely undamaged.
So if Fordo is intact, that raises questions about the feasibility of Israel's stated goal, right?
Yeah.
What are the main challenges Israel faces?
Definitely. The sources point out several major military hurdles. First, Israel apparently lacks the specific types of bunker buster bombs and the strategic bombers needed to reliably destroy a facility as hardened as Fordo.
So a quick knockout blow isn't really possible.
It seems unlikely. The sources state the offensive is not going to be concluded anytime soon. Second, even though Israel hit Iran's command structure hard initially, Iran's missile attacks on Israel hadn't stopped or significantly lessened in intensity.
So the retaliation continues.
Yes. Reports mentioned at least 24 deaths in Israel. Ben Gurion Airport shuttered for a time. If Israel's air campaign can't stop those incoming attacks, the domestic pressure on Netanyahu to end the operation could grow.
And a ceasefire without destroying the facilities? That would look like a failure.
It would certainly be framed that way, potentially as a defeat, given the initial objective.
Okay, so that puts Netanyahu in a really tough spot. What do the sources suggest are his options moving forward?
They basically lay out 3 difficult paths. Option 1, state collapse or regime change in Iran.
How would that work?
Continuing the bombing, but maybe expanding targets to include state institutions, critical infrastructure, possibly even assassinating top leaders like Ayatollah Khamenei, which Netanyahu didn't rule out in an interview.
But could that backfire?
That's the risk. The sources note this gray area where widespread bombing and casualties could actually rally Iranians around the regime, strengthening its narrative about an external Zionist entity threat.
Okay, what's option 2?
Diplomacy. Interestingly, even amid the bombing, President Trump apparently signaled openness to a deal. There were reports Iran sent feelers through intermediaries saying they'd talk if the bombing stopped.
But they want different things, right?
Right. Trump wants Iran to completely abandon its nuclear program. Iran seems willing to scale back, but not give it up entirely. Plus, the timing is suspicious. The Israeli attack started just days before U.S.-Iran talks were scheduled to resume. Suggests diplomacy wasn't Israel's first choice.
Okay. And the third option?
Option 3 is dragging the U.S. into the war.
How likely is that? Trump said the U.S. wasn't involved.
Publicly, yes. But he also apparently admitted knowing about the attack plans and giving Israel a clear green light. And sources like Axios reported Israeli officials were actively pressing the U.S. to join in, believing American military power is needed for total destruction or regime change.
That would be a massive escalation.
Huge. If Tehran were to fall, it could completely reshape the region, impact Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, the whole balance of power. For now, Trump's stance seems to be, let Israel handle it, no ceasefire. But the sources anticipate that as the conflict drags on, the pressure on him to get directly involved will inevitably increase.
A very volatile situation.
Yep.
Okay, let's shift one last time back to the tech section, but for something completely different. The world of hydraulics. Think about everyday heavy machinery, cranes lifting impossible weights, excavators digging relentlessly, even aircraft landing gear deploying smoothly. Ever wonder what makes that power and precision possible?
Chances are it's hydraulics at work.
Exactly. It's this amazing technology for converting input power, usually from an engine or electric motor, into really flexible, controllable mechanical power.
And it all comes down to a pretty elegant principle, Pascal's law.
Yes, Blaise Pascal. Remind us.
Basically, Pascal figured out back in the 17th century that if you apply pressure to a fluid that can't be compressed like oil, that pressure gets transmitted equally in all directions through the fluid.
Okay.
So what that means practically is that a small force applied to the fluid over a small area can generate a much, much larger force over a larger area somewhere else in the system. That's the magic behind lifting heavy loads.
Simple principle, powerful results. Are there other advantages?
Oh, yeah. Compared to purely mechanical systems like gears and levers, hydraulics offer really smooth, precise movements. They generally have a high power-to-weight ratio, which is great for mobile equipment. They handle heat dissipation well, and the controls can be incredibly fine-tuned.
Okay, so if Pascal's law is the principle, what are the main components? What are the building blocks that make up a hydraulic system?
Well, most systems have about 6 general parts, but let's focus on the dynamic ones. First, you need pumps.
Right, to get the fluid moving.
Exactly. They take the mechanical energy input and convert it into fluid pressure and flow. There are different kinds, gear pumps, piston pumps, depending on what pressure and flow rate you need.
Okay, pumps create the pressure. Then what?
Then you need valves. Think of them as the traffic cops of the system. They control where the pressurized oil goes, how much flows, and when. They can be simple manual levers or sophisticated electronic controls.
Got it. Pumps push, valves direct. What does the actual work?
That's the job of the actuators. These are the real workhorses. The most common type you see is the linear actuator, or hydraulic cylinder.
The shiny metal rods you see moving on diggers.
Those are the ones, usually chrome-plated for durability. Inside, you have a rod sliding in and out of a cylinder. Oil pressure pushing on the piston determines the force, the oil flow rate determines the speed, and which side the oil pushes on determines the direction. Simple, but very effective.
And are there other kinds of actuators?
Yep. The other main type is a rotary actuator, or hydraulic motor. Instead of pushing in a straight line, its output rotates. Think of something driving a winch wheel on a crane.
Okay, so pumps, valves, actuators, anything else?
Well, you obviously need tanks to hold the fluid, pipes and hoses to carry it, and often sensors to monitor things like pressure and temperature. But the pumps, valves, and actuators are really the core functional components.
So given how fundamental this technology is, where do we see hydraulics used today, and what's the future look like for them?
Oh, the applications are incredibly broad. Agriculture, construction, waste management, manufacturing automation, even wind turbines. Hydraulics are everywhere in both mobile equipment and static factory machinery. It's a huge global market, maybe $45–50 billion and growing steadily.
Is the technology still evolving?
Definitely, especially with advances in electronics and electrification. We're seeing more sophisticated sensors integrated into hydraulic systems, tracking movement, temperature, pressure, even oil contamination levels.
And safety.
Or performance. Both, really. Better sensors mean improved safety features, But the data can also be used to optimize performance and enable predictive maintenance, fixing problems before they cause a breakdown.
Are there downsides? Areas for improvement?
Well, energy efficiency is one area. Current hydraulic systems are often only around 30–40% efficient overall. Engineers are working hard to improve that, especially with environmental regulations in mind.
Could electric systems replace hydraulics eventually?
People have tried, especially for smaller applications, but the sources seem pretty clear for heavy-duty tasks, large-scale operations, and situations requiring that unique combination of high force, precision, and durability. There's currently no system to beat the prevailing advantages of hydraulics. As operations get bigger and more complex, hydraulics often still outperform purely electrical setups.
From pensions to particle physics, or at least epigenetics, and from global strategy to the nuts and bolts of heavy machinery, today's deep dive really highlights constant change and complexity. Makes you wonder, as our world gets more technologically advanced and interconnected, are we building more robust systems or just more intricate vulnerabilities? Something to think about. Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.